Missouri had just started spring football when the COVID-19 coronavirus hit and things were shut down after 3 workouts. The situation is difficult for every college football program, but Mizzou got an extra dose of burden because they're breaking in a new coach and a new quarterback. It's Wednesday, April 15th. I'm Blair Kirchhoff, and on today's SportsBeat KC, Mizzou beat writer Souichi Terada brings us up to date on the Tigers in football and men's basketball. We talk about the challenges faced by new coach Eli Drinkwitz, the recruiting week for Conzo Martin's basketball team, and the athletic department's finances if football is disrupted. So let's get started talking Mizzou with Souichi Terada. Hey, Souichi, how you doing?
I'm good. Still cooped up in Como, but I'm assuming, or hopefully everyone else is cooped up too, so things are just kind of going by now.
Cooped up in Como. I like that as a as a headline. Do you get out at all? How far are you from your local grocery store or pharmacy?
Only like a couple of miles. I go to the local Walmart, so I try to get out and go for a walk. But it's sometimes just easier to just be cooped up and just not do anything. So I guess that's accountability or whatever we journalists try to strive for.
Right. You say you're not doing anything. I know that's not true because I've been reading many stories about the Tigers, but there's one that I want to refer to that was written more than a month ago. And in fact, it was posted on the Kansas City Star's website on March the 7th. And the headline is, "Nothing's given, everything's earned. MU opens Drinkwitz era with spring practice." This was your preview of spring football at Missouri. And this was posted within a week of sports shutting down. I believe March 12th, 11th and 12th will be the days that we'll remember of sports shutting down for the pandemic. How many workouts did Missouri actually get in?
So they got 3 practices in. Unfortunately, I was actually not able to go to said third practice because of the SEC tournament. The way it timed out and the way it was scheduled, I was actually already in Nashville for that. A few other media members as well kind of missed it. They were only able to get in 3. It's so weird to think everything was normal. Football practices were going on, and all of a sudden it gets shut down. Actually, it's funny. So sports, the SEC tournament was shut down in Nashville on that Thursday. Which now looking back is on March 12th, and Mizzou was actually supposedly scheduled to have spring practice on that 13th, on that Friday. And so it was scheduled for 3:30. I was about 6-7 hours away in Nashville, and I wanted to make that. If it was going to happen, it actually got moved up, so I was still hustling. But then I remember an hour or two before it was supposed to happen, the SEC shuts down all organized team activities, including spring practices, until tentatively was supposed to be April 15th today, but then that got moved back even further. So here we are now into the unknown, and that's just kind of what happened with Mizzou football there. It was a very uncertain, kind of discombobulated few days just because nobody really knew what was going on from Mizzou to the SEC to really Jim Sturck and Drinkwitz and everyone involved.
Yeah, look, we're in unprecedented times, and you're right. There was a lot of confusion everywhere for a few days, and it's taken us the evolution of this, staying in, wearing masks, social distancing, all of that. It's all been a process, and something I remember in the early days, maybe within 2 weeks of this, was Coach Drinkwitz putting out a public service announcement about social distancing, and he was one of the handful of coaches I saw put out an announcement on his Twitter account.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Nick Saban do it, Ed Ogeron, Tom Herman, and Eli Drinkwitz, along with some other coaches. But I just thought, look, he was it was a good positive message, and for a program where college football means so much, where football means so much to the Tigers, who better to hear from than a college football coach, even when he's not very familiar to the fan base yet.
Yeah, and it was funny because I remember Drinkwitz tweeting about, I forgot which football coach it was, but he retweeted some tweet about how football coaches shouldn't, be asked about the coronavirus. But that was before, I think he realized that he does have this platform, and he mentioned this as well over a Zoom call a couple of weeks ago with the media. He has a lot of family members who are part of, really on the front lines, and we talk about this a lot in media now. But the nurses, the health officials, all those people who are involved with this, and he does have kind of this personal touch or say to this, and I think he realized that, hey, one, I make $4 million as a Mizzou football coach, but I do have this platform as a coach, to be able to tell people to stay indoors, to kind of spread the good word. So I think he took advantage of that, which is good to see, especially when he realizes that kind of magnitude at such a young age.
Absolutely. And look, he could have, if this had happened a year ago, he could have done the same thing at Appalachian State. But it's it's just a different level now where he is. It's he's talking to a lot more people, and I was glad to see that. So so you wrote a month ago, 5 weeks ago, about what kind of what was on tap and what to look for and what the storylines were for Missouri going into spring football. And to be honest with you, I don't think any of that's really changed because of getting in just the couple of practices. Missouri, it turns out, is I think as you size up Missouri football for 2020 and the SEC for next season, one thing I look at is programs with new coaches that also are going to have new quarterbacks. And Missouri's one of three in the conference that is falling into that position. No matter who ends up playing quarterback for Mizzou, it's going to be a new quarterback with Trevon Bryant gone. And look, Mississippi State with Mike Leach also bringing in a new quarterback, and Arkansas with Pittman, new coach there, also a new quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if all three of them are going to go with transfer quarterbacks. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's well established at Mississippi State that KJ Costello, who played 29 games at Stanford, is going to be the Bulldogs quarterback, and then of course we know at Arkansas where Felipe Franks transferred from Florida, and he's going to be the starter at Arkansas. And I think you wrote this, and it looks it looked to be the direction that Missouri was going to go. That Sean Robinson, the TCU transfer, was headed to be at least the guy to take first team reps in spring practice. I don't know if we would have called him the starter, but he was certainly the guy that was going to take the first team reps, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think one of the more difficult things with that Mizzou's quarterback battle is just that you really do have two guys who are pretty different in terms of scheme and what they can do, and it is kind of similar to what Mizzou kind of dealt with last year. I mean, Kelly Bryant was, he wasn't necessarily a guy who you are calling design quarterback runs for consistently. I don't think we saw that out of him too much, but he could use his legs, and that was a big part of his offense. And Taylor Powell, obviously, his backup last year, he's more of a pocket passer, and you're kind of dealt the similar hand here just because Sean Robinson is a guy who can run. He showed that at TCU. He is more like a Kelly Bryant, and he can run with the ball. And Drinkwitz mentioned this as well. Based on the scheme and based on your starter, you kind of go off of their strengths, right? You're not going to make, a pocket passing style offense for Sean Robinson and vice versa with Taylor Powell. So there is kind of a struggle with there. And I think, look, I mean, this sucks for a lot of football programs around the country, but when you look at just the complexities of a completely new offense with Drinkwitz and just how different it's going to be compared to what it was under Derek Dooley last year, I think it's just double or triply so just horrible timing for Mizzou. And one thing that I personally found a little interesting, and I mentioned this in one of my leads the other day, is just that Drinkwitz mentioned the 6-day or 6 practice install for his offense in terms of the scheme. And he basically said, hey, we'll go through this install process as much as we need. And so essentially they got through half of one install. They weren't even able to get through one full full 6 practice sessions. So it's just another wrinkle to show the kind of struggles that Mizzou and Drinkwitz are going to go through in both the short term and the long term, just because this is something they're going to be dealing with for at least the next few years, honestly, just with instilling the culture and everything.
Right. Hey, I want to thank you for correcting me on Kelly Bryant's name. How soon we forget, and how nicely you just dropped in Kelly Bryant after I called him Trevon Bryant. I don't know why I did that, but nice move on your part. Hey, so what did Appalachian State run last year? Heck, it's my alma mater. I should know, and I did watch their Sun Belt Conference championship game and their bowl victory. But is any clues watching App State last season as to what might see from Mizzou this year?
I think one thing you take away from the Drinkwitz offense is he's very reliant on the saying pro tempo style, and pro tempo style. I don't think you really hear that too much, just because when you think of football, you think pro style, and you think the NFL, or even in college, you're gonna the old sayings of establish a run, and we heard that a lot last year, right? For Mizzou football's offense, but when you hear from Drinkwitz, he's talking a lot about, hey, we're gonna run pro style concepts with a lot of tempo, which isn't I mean we see that a lot, but it seems like he's very reliant on these sayings. And one thing too that I kind of noticed from Drinkwitz and speaking to him last time, which was a couple weeks ago now already, he mentioned that at NC State, when he was an offensive coordinator in 2018, he had more of a pocket style kind of guy. He plays for the Bengals now. I really should have his name in front of me, but can't get it off the top of my head. But he had more of a this pocket passer type of guy, like Taylor Powell. Like Taylor Powell now from Mizzou, whereas with Appalachian State last year, he had more of a Sean Robinson type where he can run a little bit. So it's just another kind of thing where, yeah, you can look at Appalachian State, you can look at NC State from the last few years, but at the end of the day, so much of his style and so much of what he does is relying on the quarterback. And considering the fact that we don't know, he doesn't even know who that's going to be, it's just another example where, hey, we really don't know what to expect from Drinkwitz and Mizzou so far. So I think it's a little fun just because I'm sure he's kind of sweating about it right now, but I'm sure he's thinking of schemes or what have you with all this downtime too. So maybe that's a little bit of a perk there.
Yeah, Ryan Finley's the guy I think we were talking about.
Yes.
Went quarterback at NC State, who went on to play for the Bengals. What can happen in terms of coaching and working out with players in this? What are SEC bylaws allowing from a from a coaching standpoint? How is there any way that coaches can work with these players? Virtually, or how is that happening, if it's happening?
Yeah, so the SEC just actually announced the other day that, so originally a few weeks ago, it was supposed to be 2 hours of remote coaching sessions online. So basically you're able to, Zoom or whatever app you want to use, the coaches are able to contact players, kind of see how they're doing and everything. And they kept tabs on them, but they weren't really allowed to coach them. So players are kind of, they're either at Como, they're at home, they're wherever they may feel safe during this pandemic. But originally it was 2 hours. That got bumped up to 4 hours, which started last Monday. So not 2 days ago Monday, but last week. So they have 4 hours of coaching, which is great, which is fine. I mean, it's not what you want, obviously, with all of spring football canceled. And I kind of asked this to Drinkwitz because I was curious, like, what players are doing in terms of workouts and staying in shape. Technically speaking, coaches aren't allowed to ask players if they're even going through workouts through volunteer or suggested workouts from the strength and conditioning coach, Zach Woodfin. So it's we keep saying unprecedented times, but in this stage, in this position, like, if you have maybe a young freshman, 18, 19-year-old, they're not as disciplined as your juniors or seniors, and they kind of get out of shape, it's just another thing where you're kind of like, oh no, we have to worry about this thing just because we can't keep tabs, or technically keep tabs on these kids. So it's just another thing where you really do have to rely on your senior leaders, or kind of your leaders in your positional groups. And right now, I mean, if starters aren't set, even those kind of things are not set in stone again.
Okay, hey, Souichi, let's take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about some positions other than quarterback. Back in just a second. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. Souichi Terada, who covers Mizzou for the Kansas City Star and kansascity.com, is here. We're talking Mizzou football right now, and we just wrapped up talking about what Missouri might do at quarterback. There are some positions, some skill positions that look promising. Got running backs. Looks like a position of strength for the Tigers. They did get a big transfer, wide receiver. There are some pieces on the offense that whoever ends up playing quarterback it's not a bare cupboard for the Tigers.
Yeah, if we were talking skill positions, I absolutely agree with you. Damon Hazelton, transfer out of he was an All ACC player for Virginia Tech. Like he's looking like a guy you can really rely on his 1 year here, and I think Drinkos will have a lot of fun scheming him open and all those kinds of things. And you mentioned running back. You have Tyler Beatty and Larry Roundtree. Both of those guys are, they struggled the second half of the season just like the entire Mizzou offense did. But, that's one of your captains there, Larry, and Beatty was probably your best wide receiver in some ways last year. So both those guys are great. On offense, though, the one big question mark, though, and we have to talk about it, is the offensive line. And tight end, I think Daniel Parker Jr. kind of showed some things. Albert O, obviously, is allowed to be drafted next week in the NFL draft, likely. So, but the offensive line, I mean, they weren't that great last year. That's the thing. There were a lot of holes. And then you lose three guys, Trevor Wallace-Sims, Tristan Colon-Castillo, and Yasir Duran. And really, so you bring back two guys who have experience. You have Larry Borum back. You have Case Cook back. Both those guys are solid in terms of experience, but at the same time, they weren't necessarily great when you look back at the 2019 film either. And that's the thing for me too. Like if you're going to run any kind of pro style, or if you're going to run any type of offense, it really does start in the trenches, right? And just the question marks on that offensive line just make you go, I'm not really sure what we have here, And then I think when you're looking at an offensive line kind of positional group and you really think about those practices, those reps, that technical aspect of offensive line is just so big in what, the position is. And I think that really hurts Mizzou in the long run. Just not being able to work with this new offensive line coach you get from Mississippi State. It's just another thing where you're like, oh no, this pandemic just really, it sucks once again. But not being able to work with your offensive lineman, you're probably your one big question mark on offense besides quarterback, obviously. Like that makes me nervous if I were a Mizzou fan.
Yeah, and of course it's only the SEC, so no good defensive fronts to contend with for an offensive line in this conference. I say tongue in cheek. It's the one place. It really is the one place that you don't want to have question marks in this conference. It is unforgiving with the defenses that are in this league for sure, and we'll get a verification of that, as you mentioned, next week during the NFL draft when we see defensive star after defensive star from Georgia and Alabama and LSU and Auburn, everybody get drafted. It's just a phenomenal conference for everything, but especially for defense. And speaking of the NFL draft, I was on a conference call earlier this week with Gil Brandt, who is extremely high on Alberto. Said probably
No.
more than he should be, and wouldn't be surprised to see Alberto go in the second round.
Oh, wow.
As I'm rated as his number 39 overall prospect, and he did qualify that by saying I probably have him as high as anybody, but he just when he sees him on film, he saw a guy with terrific athleticism and understood the quarterback situation last year for the Tigers, and I guess was more impressed when Alberto was working with Drew Lock, and so it is something to keep an eye on next weekend when it's draft time. But hey, keeping with the 2020 edition of the Tigers, let's go over to defense. Look, there are some losses here, right? Cale Garrett. And speaking of the NFL draft, Jordan Elliott might sneak into the first round, might be a
Yeah,
second
yeah,
day guy.
yeah.
So DeMarcus Hasey's another loss, but there again there are some pieces here on the defensive side. Starting with Nick Bolton.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you're speaking Mizzou defense 2020 edition, you're going to start and end with Nick Bolton, right? All American guy, all SEC guy. He was just everywhere last year. I mean, I show up on the beat, midway through the season, they start losing. No matter what they did, where they were at, Nick Bolton was there because he was that good. And I think you're hoping now that he's a junior, he has a year of great football under his belt. You're hoping that he's one of the guys who's really going to take this defense in hand and kind of go from there and hope he can lead them. But defense is kind of a different story because Drinkwitz mentioned this too. You return 7 starters. Ryan Walters is back. You run back the same scheme. Yeah, sure, you don't have Barry Odom, who, he got fired, yes, criticisms, yes, but he is a defense first guy. He is touted for his defensive knowledge. So, yeah, you do lose a little bit of that. And, yeah, maybe Ryan Walters is a little young, is a little green, especially as defensive coordinator. But, hey, you return a lot on defense, and you feel a little bit better. Maybe along that defensive line, especially on the ends, it's a little bit more question mark. I mean, Jordan Elliott left, but hey, you still have Kobe Whiteside, who did have a few good games, who is a pretty good guy and everything. So once again, the trenches are looking a little iffy. You really want to find a guy on the defensive ends who will make an impact. I think you're feeling a little bit better though once you get to the linebackers. And yeah, sure, you lose Cale Garrett, but in his stead, you find a guy like Devin Nicholson, who another Detroit native. Here we go again. Me talking about Michigan.
You flag him down, man.
Yeah.
Well, they can't sneak a Detroit guy by you for sure.
Well, he was starting at middle linebacker as a freshman, as a true freshman. So I was like, oh, I got to take note of that. And I did. And we spoke about it, of course. But Devin Nicholson and those guys and those linebackers, you're feeling a little bit better about. In the secondary, though, I mean, it wasn't just AC you lost. You also lost Christian Holmes. And, he had a rough Tennessee game where I can't say his name. Tennessee's quarterback, Jared Garantano. I don't know. Do you know how to say it, Blair?
I will. I'll review it quickly here and try to remind myself.
But yeah, so Christian Holmes had a rough game against Tennessee. Yeah, sure, but he was going to be likely a starter. So that's another, kind of an iffy mark. And then you're going to play a 4-2-5 defense again. So the defensive backs under Ryan Walters is going to be a big deal. I mean, you have you have quite a bit of coaching for the defense.
Right.
In terms of because Charlie Harbison, David Gibbs, and Ryan Walters are all really 3 coaches who are going to be coaching the secondary, depending on the position. So you have a lot of kind of resources there. So as a whole, I think you're feeling a lot better about the defense. But the guys you do lose were so big to what Mizzou did. I think it makes you pause a little bit for sure.
Let's switch sports actually, and talk a little men's basketball. Not a great week on the recruiting trail for the Tigers. Missed out on a couple of recruits, I think on the same day, didn't they, Souichi?
Yes, technically the same day, about 2 p.m. Eastern time for Justin Turner, who elected, not the baseball player, mind you, who elected to stay at Bowling Green and spurn Iowa State, Marquette, and Mizzou all at the same time. And then Josh Christopher, the highly touted 5-star guard, who went on his big social media thing at 8:24 p.m. Pacific time, so 10:24 our time. He ended up choosing Arizona State. So Mizzou went 0 for 2 on Monday, which is rough, but that's where they stand right now.
Well, and look, you hate to lose out on guys, and especially higher profile guys, but this is already a team that's returning about 90% of its scoring from last year. There's a pretty good feeling about how the Tigers will shape up, and they're not over, and they're not finished with the recruiting efforts.
Yeah, so they have 2 scholarship spots still left open because Mario McKinney and Trey Jackson, another Detroit native, he is gone now. Unfortunately, he was a great kid. But you have those 2 spots open. You look. It sounds, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like Mizzou is still going after some guys. You're kind of retooling, recharging a little bit. You have another Blair. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you have another Detroit native, David Julius. He's a Michigan transfer, so not the Michigan State I graduated from, but the Wolverines. He still has 2 years remaining. He's in the transfer portal. Mizzou is a finalist once again, along with Iowa State and Marquette again for some reason. And this time he has Cincinnati. So he is set, reportedly, to announce his decision tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time. So maybe Mizzou goes 0-3 this week, but they do have another crack at it. And luckily for them, there is another Detroit connection, Cornell Mann. And the reason there are so many Michigan connections is because Cornell Mann, he's from the Detroit area. And we have spoken about this, but he's from the Detroit area, and he is kind of the guy who kind of gets all these Michigan folks and tries to get them to Mizzou. And it's sounding like the connection is working. It's just that Mizzou is obviously trying to be the one guy or the one school that they do commit to. But that's kind of where they stand right now.
If you haven't already, and as you grow more comfortable in the Missouri beat and in Como, I would advise you to read up on the Missouri Tigers basketball team of the teams of the 1980s into the early 1990s, and the original Detroit connection for the Tigers, and what some of those players, how some of those players helped Missouri and Norm Stewart build the program into top 10 and NCAA tournament regular team, and very much fueled by the Motor City.
I have a funny story about that, actually. I remember at my interview with the Star, the day when you're kind of jettisoned from place to place, and I spoke with you as well, Blair, but I remember dropping that Detroit connection to Vahe, and he was like, oh, yeah, Norm had all those Detroit cats, and he kind of looked at me, and he, kind of side-eyeing me, as Vahe does sometimes, and he's like, I'm impressed you know that, and I'm like, thank you, Vahe, I did research on the job I'm trying to get, so... I do know a little bit. I won't say I know about it intimately as Vahe or you might, Blair, but it was enough to get Vahe to be impressed. So I'll take my points there.
Yeah. If you can impress Vahe, then you've scaled a mountain. Really. Hey, let's talk about one other thing that you've written recently, and you collaborated really with some other McClatchy reporters about finances in the SEC and what a future with a disrupted football season could look like financially for Missouri, and of course other SEC schools were mentioned in the story as well. And we'll post a link to that story in the show notes for this podcast. But what kind of conclusions did you draw from that? And one thing that I read, I'll start it off. But one thing that I noticed was Missouri has operated in the red athletically for the last 3 years. Now, not by a lot, but not. But the fact that they are in the red and not in the black was interesting to me.
Yeah, and I mean, like you mentioned, it wasn't a lot. And I think if Mizzou really wanted to become in the black, they could probably go some cost-cutting ways. And I think at that point, when you're talking millions and millions of dollars, I think there is a little bit of an accounting aspect to it. And I'm not saying I know more than Jim Sturk about the finances, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's not enough to the point where I think you're worrying. I mean, if you're $10 million in the red every year, I think you're kind of like, well, what's going on there? But between, these projects and these donations, I think you are moving some funds around. And as we all know, especially with SEC teams, there is kind of a rainy day fund I'm sure Mizzou will have to tap into these next few years. when it comes to the fund. But yeah, I mean, when you're speaking $1.8 million, you're operating that at a loss, and but realistically, the numbers are 108, $109 million in terms of revenue expenses. That is not as much as it is kind of a drop in the bucket, relatively speaking, when you're looking at these budgets.
One thing that everybody agrees on is, no football would be,
Yeah,
a major loss. And we saw earlier this week that one school, Baylor, announced that it was cutting expenses at the university by, I think it was the number was 65 to $80 million through various cuts in terms of salary and some positions, but also, sports is not immune to that. And look, I wouldn't be surprised, depending on what gets determined about the future of football, if it's going to be delayed, if it's going to be a spring sport, possibly, if it's going to if it's going to happen without fans in the stands, whatever the result is, we'll see some. There'll have to be some austerity measures for colleges and universities, and people like Jim Sturk, the athletic director there, and ads all over the country are really having to deal with a situation that nobody else in the history of college sports has had to deal with. So I just we really don't know any answers, except they're working hard and preparing, I guess, for the worst.
yeah, and look, a lot of people who don't quite understand how college athletics works will see them as Mizzou is in the red, and they'll be like, "Why are we fielding a football team? Why are we doing this? Blah blah blah." But look, football pays the bills, and when dissecting Mizzou's financial numbers, it's so pulling from the story here, and I'm just going to read this verbatim from the story because I have it pulled up. If hypothetically there was no football and MU lost its profits from football, the school would go from a $1 million loss to operating at a $16 million loss, $16,407,588, and that's just so much money. That's just that those are worlds different, like we mentioned, and football really does pay the bills. And the big thing I think is that we're talking, and Blair, when we talk about the NCAA tournament and not having that, and we also have reports about how revenue is going down. That's going to hit these kind of G5 schools instead of Mizzou a lot harder. Just because, I mean, we saw Cincinnati discontinue its men's soccer program in the last few days, and I wouldn't be shocked if the smaller schools have to kind of deal with that financial burden. Luckily, Mizzou and comparing Cincinnati's budget is kind of different just because of SEC revenues and all these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, Mizzou isn't immune to it, but it does help that they are, the show me school or whatever, the university for the state, which, Mizzou takes a lot of pride in. But yeah, I mean, if football is not played, then all bets are off in terms of the fiscal year. Just because
Yeah, for sure.
you're not getting as many donations. You're not, the media rights. And sure, you might not cure some expenses through travel and all that, but just the financial ramifications. I don't even want to think about it, just because the financial ramifications would have such a widespread effect, and it wouldn't be just Mizzou. It would be pretty much every college in the country, and that's kind of a scary thing to think about as a sports journalist trying to cover these teams and everything.
Right, right. Um, we've it's monitoring social media throughout this, and it I find that people are understandably concerned and wary. They want to know when baseball is coming back and what's going to happen with the NFL. But then I read college football fans, especially SEC football fans, say basically it's the end of the world if there's no college football season. They could live without the NFL, they could live without Major League Baseball, without golf, but man, you take away their Saturday afternoons in the South, and that's now we've reached a level of what do we kind of what are we doing? Is this really worth it? And it's a little bit of hyperbole, but not by much. I mean, that's how important college football is just to the psyche of that region, and we know how important it is financially to to all the schools in the SEC. That's why Missouri is in the SEC for financial reasons. That's why realignment happened a decade or so ago, because people or schools put themselves in better financial situations. So,
wow.
all right.
It's already been a decade, huh? In terms of realignment.
Yeah. Yes. Might be worth, we're closing in on it. Closing in on it. So, all right, Souichi, great catching up with you, and you stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yep, sounds good, Blair. Thanks.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to the production team of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Cap tip goes to Souichi Terada for spending some time with us. Hey, been telling you this for a couple weeks now, and I'll say it again. Supporting local journalism has never been more important. I mentioned the Sports Pass offer earlier in the show, and that's a great deal. So is subscribing to the full menu of Kansas City Star news and sports offerings. To learn more about this, go to account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Thursday with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City every day.